Burt Reynolds was one of the biggest stars Hollywood had ever seen, charming, fearless, and unforgettable on screen. But behind the fame, there was one part of his life he never fully got over: his love for Sally Field. For years, fans wondered what really happened between them, and in his final years, Burt finally opened up with the truth. Join us as we uncover the untold story of Burt Reynolds' deepest confession about Sally Field. The unexpected rise of Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds' story didn't start in Hollywood. It began in Lansing, Michigan, where he was born in 1936 to Harriet Furnett and Burton Milo Reynolds. His father was an army man, which meant the family never stayed in one place for very long. Burt grew up moving from town to town, carrying with him the feeling of being both everywhere and nowhere. Later in life, he often told people he was from Waycross, Georgia. He wasn't really born there, but he liked the way it sounded, and maybe it felt closer to where he believed he truly belonged. That mix of northern roots and southern identity would stay with him and even shape his screen persona years later. As a boy, Burt wasn't thinking about becoming an actor. His eyes were set on sports. By the time he was in high school in Riviera Beach, Florida, he was a force on the football field. At Palm Beach High, he played fullback and quickly rose to be the star of the team. He earned honors like First-Team All-State and All-Southern, proving he wasn't just another player. He was the one everyone watched. Scouts noticed his talent, and he landed a scholarship to Florida State University. For Burt, it felt like he was on a straight path to the NFL. But that dream shattered almost as soon as it began. During his freshman year at Florida State, Burt was injured badly on the field. What could have been a setback turned into a turning point. Before he could recover fully, he got into a serious car accident. The crash cost him his spleen, left him with another damaged knee, and stripped away the speed and power that had made him such a dominant athlete. The professional football career he imagined was suddenly gone. It was a crushing blow, but Burt wasn't the type to stay down for long. While he was healing, he enrolled at Palm Beach Junior College. At first, he was just trying to keep busy. Then, by chance, he signed up for a class with a professor named Watson Boone Duncan III. Duncan asked Burt to read a piece of Shakespeare aloud, and what he heard impressed him. He saw something Burt himself didn't yet recognize. Duncan pushed him to audition for a play called Outward Bound. Burt landed the lead role, and from that moment, something clicked. He discovered he could perform. He wasn't just good, he was magnetic on stage. In New York, Burt faced the grind of an aspiring actor. He took on whatever jobs would pay the bills: waiting tables, washing dishes, and even working as a bouncer at Roseland Ballroom. When he wasn't working, he was acting in plays, chasing every opportunity to prove himself. His first big break came with a role in the Broadway play, Look, We've Come Through. It didn't make him a star overnight, but it got people to notice him. The play went on tour, and those performances opened doors that had once seemed closed forever. That was the beginning of Burt Reynolds' unlikely rise, from sidelined football player to rising actor with a new kind of future. And just wait until you hear how he went from the stage to becoming a Hollywood name everyone knew. Breaking into Hollywood. By the mid-1960s, Burt Reynolds was starting to make his way in Hollywood, but it didn't happen overnight. His first big role came on television, in the long-running Western Gunsmoke. The show was already a hit when Burt joined the cast in 1962. He played Quint Asper, a blacksmith who was half Comanche, and brought a new kind of character to the series. Audiences quickly warmed to him, but in 1965, he left Gunsmoke to try to carve out a bigger career in film. At first, the transition wasn't easy. Burt landed role after role, but most of the films he made in the late 1960s didn't do much for his reputation. In 1969 alone, he had a string of projects that showed both his determination and the unpredictable side of the industry. In Sam Whiskey, a 1969 Western comedy, Burt finally had the chance to show a lighter side of himself. He played the charming, mischievous lead with a sense of humor that later became one of his trademarks. At the time, though, critics didn't fully understand what he was trying to do, and the movie was overlooked. Later, Burt would say the film was ahead of its time. He also appeared in 100 Rifles with Raquel Welch and Jim Brown. Filmed in Spain, it was a chaotic set, but it gave Burt more visibility and proved he could hold his own alongside bigger stars. Even with all this work, Burt wasn't yet considered one of Hollywood's top names. At one point, he was even suggested for the role of Michael Corleone in The Godfather. It could have been the break of a lifetime, but Marlon Brando, who played Don Vito Corleone, strongly objected. Brando reportedly threatened to quit if Reynolds was cast, saying he didn't respect Burt as an actor. The part went to Al Pacino, and while it became one of the greatest roles in film history, Burt brushed off the rejection with his usual charm. He later joked that if Brando disliked him that much, it was almost flattering. Burt's next move, however, put him in the spotlight like never before. In 1972, he agreed to pose nude for Cosmopolitan magazine. The idea came from editor Helen Gurley Brown, who wanted to flip the usual formula of objectifying women and instead present a man as the center of desire. That same year, Burt finally landed the role that changed everything: Lewis Medlock in Deliverance. The film told the story of 4 men on a canoe trip in the Georgia wilderness that turns into a nightmare. Burt's character was tough, rugged, and uncompromising, the kind of role that fit him perfectly. While other actors like Jack Nicholson had been considered, Burt got the part partly because he came cheaper. The film was a massive success and became a classic. For Burt, it was the turning point. Suddenly, he was not just a TV actor or a struggling film star. He was leading one of the most important movies of the 1970s and proving to Hollywood that he belonged at the top. And it was only the beginning, because right after Deliverance, Burt Reynolds was about to speed into the role that made him a household name. The Making of Smokey and the Bandit. By the mid-1970s, Burt Reynolds was already one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. He had proven himself in Deliverance and cemented his reputation as both rugged and charming. But in 1977, he took on a project that could have gone very wrong, and instead, it became one of the defining films of his career: Smokey and the Bandit. The story of how that movie came to be is as wild as the film itself. The script came from Hal Needham, a professional stuntman and one of Burt's closest friends. He wrote a screenplay about a bootlegging truck run, a fast-talking driver, and a relentless sheriff. Hal wanted to direct it himself, even though he had never directed a movie before. For most actors, trusting a first-time director with no experience would have been unthinkable. But Burt was loyal to his friend. When he read the script, he liked the energy and thought it could work. He told Hal he had 6 weeks open in his schedule, and if they could get financing fast enough, he'd do it. That decision changed everything. At first, no studio wanted to back Hal Needham as a director, even with Burt attached. Executives pushed Reynolds to take other projects instead, including Convoy, which ended up going to Chris Christopherson. But Burt kept insisting on Smokey and the Bandit. Eventually, Universal agreed to fund it, but only at a modest level. The film's budget was set at $5.3 million, and of that, a full $1 million went straight to Reynolds as his salary. That left just over $3 million to cover the cars, stunts, cast, and production costs. Considering how elaborate the car chases and comedy were, it was a small budget, but Needham and Reynolds were determined to make it work. Casting was the next big challenge, especially for the female lead. The script called for a runaway bride named Carrie, nicknamed Frog. Burt wanted Sally Field for the role, even though she wasn't the obvious choice in Hollywood at the time. Sally had been famous in the 1960s for light TV shows like Gidget and The Flying Nun. In recent years, she had shown serious acting ability in projects like Siebel, which earned her an Emmy. But despite her talent, many in Hollywood didn't see her as a traditional leading lady. She wasn't tall, glamorous, or styled like the typical women cast opposite major male stars. For Sally, those doubts weighed heavily. She often said she felt out of place in Hollywood's beauty-driven culture, too petite and too unconventional to be considered sexy. When Burt called her directly to ask her to play Carrie, she was stunned. At that time, Burt Reynolds wasn't just a star. He was the biggest box office draw in the world. To have him say he saw her as sexy and right for the role completely shocked her. It wasn't just a professional boost, it gave her personal confidence. She said that call changed her life because it showed her that someone with Burt's stature believed in her. Once filming began, it was clear Burt had been right. The chemistry between them was undeniable. On screen, their banter and flirtation felt natural, and it gave the movie its heart. Off-screen, their attraction was just as strong. Sally and Burt quickly became romantically involved, and the intensity of their relationship carried into their performances. Burt later admitted he had pushed for Sally because he knew audiences would fall in love with her the way he had. And while the movie made millions laugh, the real story was that behind the cameras, Burt and Sally's love was starting to burn just as brightly. Burt and Sally. When Burt Reynolds and Sally Field met on the set of Smokey and the Bandit in 1977, the connection between them was instant. Sally would later describe the start of their romance as intense and overwhelming. She had worked with many actors before, but Burt was different. He was already a household name, the #1 box office draw in the country, and he carried himself with confidence that was impossible to ignore. For Sally, stepping into a relationship with him felt like stepping into a whirlwind. The speed at which things developed surprised even her. Sally had often struggled with insecurity throughout her career. She didn't fit the classic mold of Hollywood beauty and had been typecast in lighter roles early on, like Gidget and the Flying Nun. Even after her Emmy-winning performance in Sybil, she still doubted whether she truly belonged among Hollywood's leading stars. Burt changed that for her. He gave her a kind of confidence she had been missing, and she admitted later that his attention and affection allowed her to see herself in a new way. For Burt, Sally represented something just as powerful. By the time they met, he had dated some of the most glamorous women in Hollywood, but Sally offered something different. He saw in her a sharp intelligence and a sense of humor that matched his own. She challenged him in ways other women hadn't, and that challenge excited him. Burt also liked that Sally kept him grounded. For someone constantly surrounded by the spotlight, her down-to-earth personality was refreshing. She wasn't caught up in the Hollywood image machine, and Burt admired her for that. To him, she was real, and he loved her for it. They quickly became Hollywood's golden couple of the late 1970s. Their photos were splashed across magazines. Their romance was written about in glowing terms, and audiences adored the idea that their favorite on-screen duo was just as in love in real life. Fans saw them as proof that movie magic could spill into real life, and soon, the very things that made them so captivating as a couple would also begin to pull them apart. Trouble behind the scenes. As much as Burt Reynolds and Sally Field seemed like the perfect couple in the eyes of the public, their relationship was far more complicated once the cameras stopped rolling. The problems between them didn't come from a lack of love or attraction. Those things were always there. Instead, much of the tension came from the fact that they wanted different things, both in their careers and in their relationship. By the late 1970s, Sally was determined to prove herself as a serious actress. She had already won praise for her work in Sybil in 1976, where she played a woman struggling with multiple personalities. That role showed the world that she wasn't just the girl from lighthearted TV shows. It showed she had range, depth, and real talent. From then on, Sally was focused on finding parts that challenged her and allowed her to grow. For her, acting wasn't just about fame, it was about meaning. Burt, on the other hand, was in a different place. By that time, he was the most popular movie star in America, ruling the box office with films like Smokey and The Bandit, Hooper, and The Cannonball Run. These movies were fun, flashy, and crowd-pleasing. They didn't win awards, but they made money and audiences loved them. Burt enjoyed being the king of big hits, and he leaned into the roles that kept him there. In his mind, he didn't need to take on heavy dramas to prove anything. This difference in ambition created a constant strain between them. Sally wanted to go deeper into her craft, while Burt preferred to stay where the laughs, stunts, and ticket sales were guaranteed. To him, her choices sometimes looked like she was prioritizing her career over their relationship. To her, his attitude sometimes made her feel like he didn't fully respect her goals. At the same time, their personal life was just as rocky. Burt brought up marriage more than once, surprising Sally with rings and proposals. On the surface, it seemed like the natural next step for them. They were in love, they worked well together, and the world expected them to marry. But each time Burt asked, Sally hesitated. Deep down, she knew something was off. She later admitted that even though she cared for him deeply, there were cracks in the relationship she couldn't ignore. Accepting his proposals would have meant ignoring her instincts, and she wasn't ready to do that. One of the biggest breaking points came when Sally was offered the role in Norma Rae in 1979. The movie was about a strong Southern woman who fought for workers' rights in a textile factory. For Sally, it was the kind of role she had been waiting for. Serious, meaningful, and challenging. Burt didn't see it the same way. After reading the script, he dismissed it and even insulted the lead character. He accused Sally of choosing ambition over love and suggested the film wasn't worth her time. The argument that followed left Sally shaken. She realized then that she couldn't depend on Burt to support her most important career choices. That moment was a turning point. Sally chose to do Norma Rae, and her decision proved right. She went on to win an Academy Award for the role. But for her personally, the fight with Burt showed her a deeper truth. As much as she loved him, their relationship couldn't grow if he couldn't accept her need to follow her own path. It was clear by then that while their love was real, their paths were heading in opposite directions. And soon, that gap between them would grow wide enough to end the relationship completely. The breakup and its fallout. By 1980, Burt Reynolds and Sally Field were no longer the golden couple they had seemed just a few years earlier. The cracks in their relationship, which had been growing quietly in private, became too wide to ignore. Their breakup came during the publicity tour for Smokey and the Bandit 2, the sequel to the film that had first brought them together. On the surface, they smiled for cameras and promoted the movie as if nothing had changed, but behind the scenes, they were drifting apart. The timing was painful. What had started with such excitement during the first Smokey had unraveled by the time the second one reached theaters. Their split wasn't clean or simple. Instead, Bert and Sally fell into an on-again, off-again cycle throughout the early 1980s. They would drift apart, then find their way back to each other, only to realize once more that the problems between them hadn't gone away. Both of them still cared deeply for one another, but caring wasn't enough. The issues that had plagued their relationship, clashing ambitions, differences in maturity, and Bert's difficulty accepting Sally's independence, remained unresolved. Each reunion felt hopeful at first, but each time, the same old struggles resurfaced. By 1982, Sally decided she had to close the door for good. For her, it wasn't a lack of love. She admitted years later that she always loved Bert, and, in some ways, always would. But she had reached a point where she needed to protect herself and her future. Continuing to circle back to Bert only kept her stuck in a cycle that left her drained and unhappy. That year, she ended things permanently, a choice that was painful but necessary. For Sally, it marked the beginning of a new chapter where she could focus fully on her own life and career without being pulled into a relationship that no longer worked. Burt, meanwhile, struggled to move on. He admitted later that losing Sally was the biggest regret of his life, though at the time, he didn't always show it. Not long after their final breakup, he began a very public relationship with actress Loni Anderson. If his romance with Sally had been about passion and complexity, his relationship with Loni became something entirely different, louder, flashier, and far more turbulent. Burt and Loni married in 1988 in what was treated like a Hollywood spectacle. Their wedding was covered heavily in the press, and for a while, they were presented as another glamorous power couple. But the marriage quickly revealed itself to be messy. Reports of fights, financial troubles, and constant tabloid stories followed them. Burt was open about the fact that their union was rocky almost from the start. When they divorced in 1994, it became one of the most bitter and public breakups in Hollywood, filled with accusations and headlines that embarrassed both of them. Looking back, the contrast between his relationships with Sally and with Loni was striking. With Sally, Burt had shared a deep connection and a love that, even if it didn't last, was rooted in genuine admiration and respect. With Loni, the relationship was consumed by public attention and personal conflict. Burt himself admitted in later interviews that he had never gotten over Sally and that no other relationship matched what they had together. And though the romance had ended, their story wasn't quite finished, because even after decades apart, Burt and Sally would still find their way back into each other's lives. Burt's turbulent later years. After his final breakup with Sally Field, Burt Reynolds entered a stage of his life filled with chaos, both personally and professionally. The 1980s and 1990s were years where he struggled to hold on to the charm and stability that had once made him the biggest star in Hollywood. Behind the smile and trademark mustache, his life became marked by failed relationships, financial troubles, health scares, and missed opportunities. One of the most public parts of this period was his marriage to actress Loni Anderson. When they wed in 1988, the ceremony was treated like a Hollywood media event. The press covered every detail of their lives together, from their lavish spending habits to their red carpet appearances. On the surface, they seemed glamorous, but behind closed doors, the marriage was troubled from the very beginning. There were accusations of infidelity, abuse, and constant fighting. Their lifestyle was expensive, with large houses, luxury cars, and extravagant purchases that drained Burt's finances. By the time they divorced in 1994, it had turned into one of the messiest celebrity splits of the decade. The tabloids covered every accusation and insult, damaging Burt's public image. His financial life collapsed alongside his marriage. Despite being one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood during the late 1970s, Burt spent money recklessly. He bought multiple properties, filled them with expensive collections, and often lived far beyond his means. When combined with poor investments and legal disputes from his divorce, his fortune quickly disappeared. By the mid-1990s, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. For a man who had once been at the top of Hollywood's financial ladder, the fall was staggering. Professionally, Burt also made choices that hurt his career. Perhaps the most famous mistake was when he turned down the role of Garrett Breedlove in Terms of Endearment. The part eventually went to Jack Nicholson, who won an Academy Award for it. Burt said later that he declined because he was committed to Stroker Ace, a light-hearted racing comedy that flopped at the box office. That decision symbolized a bigger problem. Burt often chose easy, fun films over challenging roles that could have given him long-term respect in Hollywood. As a result, his credibility in the industry suffered, and by the late 1980s, his box office power had nearly vanished. His personal struggles were made worse by a string of injuries and health problems. In 1984, while filming City Heat with Clint Eastwood, Burt was accidentally struck in the face with a chair, breaking his jaw. The injury left him in chronic pain, and he eventually became addicted to prescription painkillers. His rapid weight loss fueled rumors that he had AIDS, which he had to publicly deny. Though he later admitted the truth, that his appearance was due to addiction, those years were some of the darkest of his life. He entered rehab to confront his dependence on pills, but the damage to his health and reputation was lasting. In 2010, Burt faced another life-threatening crisis when doctors told him he needed heart surgery. He described himself as a ticking time bomb, living with blocked arteries that could have killed him at any moment. The surgery was successful, and Burt spoke afterward about his desire to keep fighting for more time. But his health continued to decline in the years that followed. Even in his final decade, Burt still hoped for one last great comeback. In 2018, Quentin Tarantino cast him in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, giving him the chance to appear alongside a new generation of stars. It was the kind of role that could have reintroduced him to audiences and reminded everyone of his talent. But before filming his scenes, Burt passed away in September of that year at the age of 82. It was a sad ending for a man who had once ruled Hollywood, but even through the turbulence, Burt Reynolds left behind a legacy that was unforgettable. Burt's private confession. In the final years of his life, Burt Reynolds was more open than ever about his regrets, and at the center of those reflections was Sally Field. For decades, he had been asked about his romances with some of Hollywood's most famous women, but whenever Sally's name came up, his answers grew softer and more vulnerable. He admitted what many had suspected all along, that Sally wasn't just another love in his long list of relationships. She was the one. In his 2015 memoir, But Enough About Me, Burt devoted an entire chapter to Sally. Unlike the sections where he recounted his career highs and friendships with fellow actors, this chapter carried a sense of unfinished business. He admitted that he had been immature during their time together and that he hadn't given her the kind of relationship she deserved. He confessed that he was selfish and too focused on his own success to be the partner she needed. Looking back, he called letting her go the biggest mistake of his life. It wasn't just a passing remark, it was a heartfelt acknowledgement that losing Sally was something he would never stop regretting. That regret followed him everywhere. Even in interviews long after they had separated, Burt often brought up Sally without being prompted. He told reporters and talk show hosts that she was the love of my life and the one who got away. These weren't rehearsed publicity lines. They were spontaneous admissions, spoken with the kind of honesty that comes only with age and reflection. For Burt, no other relationship, no matter how glamorous or public, ever matched what he had with her. In 2015, when the documentary I Am Burt Reynolds was released, he made his feelings clearer than ever. Sitting in front of the camera, older and frailer, Burt spoke directly about Sally. He admitted that he wished he had married her and that they had built a family together. For a man known for his tough, confident image, these words revealed a rare vulnerability. He wasn't trying to protect his pride. He was openly sharing his biggest regret with the world. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss what's coming next.